All right, we're gonna get started. Thank you to everybody for coming and spending some time with us today. We have the opportunity to share this moment and hear a little bit about Jack's work for the year. So Jack has put forth a lot of effort, a lot of energy, a lot of thought into what we're going to hear about, and it should be a great time. So Jack will go first, then I'm going to open it up to the panel for any questions that they might have first. After that, we're going to open it up to everybody here to share some positive feedback with Jack about things that you really appreciated out of his presentation. At that point, I'm going to steal the panel away so that we can compile some feedback for Jack, and everybody else gets to stay and hang and tell him how awesome he is and how fantastic his music is. And without further ado, let's do it.
All right, thank you guys for coming, half of the school, it seems. Welcome to my senior exhibition. If you don't know me, my name is Jack Pelletier, also known as Cultic. Can't see it very well, unfortunately, those blinds. Could you close those blinds out?
The light.
Lights. That's a little bit, there we go. Now it pops, all right, cool. So, I'm a musician, primarily electronic, and music is what I decided to focus on for my senior seminar project. Here is my essential question. How can I create an album of professional quality that both sounds good and tells a story? But, before I get into this, I want to ask you guys a question, which is, can you think of music, whether it be a song, an album, or an artist, that's changed your life in some way? If you can, any answers? David?
Foo Fighters, just in general, not an album, just the actual group.
Classic, all right.
That's true.
Caleb?
Mitski, because she's a good vibe.
I've heard she's good, I've never listened though.
You should.
I should, yes. Anything else? Rory?
Drake.
Drake. Gonna have to agree to disagree. Kyle? Haven't heard that, but sounds intriguing. X. True, missed the man. Alright, I'm gonna give you guys my answer now. To be honest, I can make like an entire hour-long presentation on this question alone, but I'm gonna pick just one now. This year is Trilogy by Carpenter Brut. And this album is honestly regarded by a lot of people as one of the greatest and most influential dark synthwave albums of like all time. And dark synthwave, for those of you who don't know, for those of you who haven't talked to me ever before, because I probably would have said something about this if you had. It's basically like a mix of like 80s nostalgia, film scores by the likes of John Carpenter, you know, like horror movie kind of stuff. It's usually fused with like a healthy dose of metal, something like electronic. And to be honest, without Trilogy, there would be no Cultic. I would not be that. I've been making my own music since the summer of 2019. Around then, I've been inspired by electronic artists such as Carpenter Brut for the majority of that time. And as soon as I learned about the senior seminar program, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. So throughout this presentation, I'm going to break down my essential question and address it in smaller pieces because there's a lot of things that this album aims to accomplish. So let's start with just one word, album. These are 5 of the albums that I've made in the past. I've already made, quite a lot of work so far, but the thing is they all sound noticeably amateur in some way. This first one here is Avarice Divine, and I would say it's probably my strongest album from an artistic standpoint, but it's mixed terribly. I had no idea what I was doing when I made this. So as it continued, I improved in that regard over time, but I sort of lost focus on telling like an effective story and like really making something important and artistic. So, making all this was really fun, but it taught me a lot, but it's just like, it's all missing something. So with this project, I wanted to combine everything I've learned and then some, to blow all of the others out of the water in every regard. Vocals to help tell a story better than ever before, and research and practice to get it sounding professional, and a feeling of immersion surpassing its predecessors. So without further ado, allow me to introduce my latest album. What I always do before even starting the music is imagine a sort of like a location or a landscape, and then I give it a soundtrack. So I want you guys to close your eyes now and sort of picture what I'm about to describe. I'll place some names here. So, a winding dirt road twists through the canyon ahead. Black rocks and black sand on either side, irregularly lined with spikes and boulders. Long dead trees infested and rotting, like leaning towards you in the wind. The frigid downpour soaks your clothes and chills your bones. Glowing eyes pierce the fog, mechanical joints flexing in the dark. Metal grinding on metal, just out of sight. On your left, a man holds a torch, the fire fighting for his life in the rain, just barely illuminating his sheet-white flesh with the fear in his eyes. He's just as lost as you are. And really, there's nowhere to go but forward because only God knows what kind of beasts might be following behind. Around you is a forgotten world old, left to decay. In the distance, a city twisted with technology and organic matter is constructed as its successor, a desperate mockery of nature's warmth. Angels watch from above as the march begins. Millions of lost souls forced onward by mechanized devils, devouring those who can't keep up with the pace. Welcome to a long road through darkness. So you guys can open your eyes now. Somehow, A Long Road Through Darkness is an almost completely unused album name, despite how grandiose that sounds. And I'm going to expand on the story and the artistic intent of this project towards the end of the presentation, but for now I just wanted to give you guys, a little taste of what's to come. So right now, what I want to do is focus on the professional quality section of this essential question. And in general, I want to start talking about the process of my research. So over the course of the senior seminar sort of experience, I split my research into two main categories, technical and artistic. And technical research is anything that has to do with mixing, mastering, synth design, audio recording, anything that's like sort of like, it's like more of like a skill that you have to build up over time, and generally things that involve the software itself that I'm using. Artistic research, on the other hand, is more of the creative side of making music. I've included, general creativity, music theory, instrumentation, choosing which instruments to use, composition, lyrics, and mindset. So to outline my research, I have these 8 sources that I found to be really useful. So let's start with the Carpenter Brut AMA. AMA means Ask Me Anything, by the way. My dad pointed that out when I was practicing. Thank you, Father. So this was hosted in the Carpenter Brut subreddit. Basically, the man himself came online and he said, ask me any questions you have and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. So by reading through his answers, I learned a lot about synth design primarily. One of the main things that I've focused on in Carpenter Brut's work is layering, which is basically putting multiple synths on top of each other to sort of fill out a frequency range and prevent things from sounding hollow. He also noted that he likes to analyze his favorite music and find things within that music that he enjoys to apply to his own work, and I sort of did that with him. He also said to develop and embrace your personal touch. Whenever you're a musician, there's going to be something about your music that's just sort of identifiable as yours. I think this happens with every art style, really. You can see someone's drawing and you say, oh, that person made that drawing. That happens with music too, and he says, embrace that, build upon it. And one of the last things he included was psychological over technical. This means that a lot of the time, being willing to work and to put in the time and just being in the right headspace can be a lot more important than just knowing what you're doing, because that doesn't matter if you're not doing anything in the first place. The next thing I looked at was a Chris Lord-Alge masterclass. So Chris Lord-Alge is an audio engineer who's been in the industry for decades now. He's pretty well known and well regarded. And in his masterclass, he talked about a couple important things. First of all, organization and efficiency in your project files. So a project file is basically in your software where you're making the music. And if you make a mess out of it, and whenever you come back to work on it again, it's going to be a mess, and you're not going to know what anything is, and you're just going to waste your own time trying to figure out where you put what or how you did what. And if you just do this from the start, then you'll save yourself a lot of time in the long run. He also said to be conscious of subtleties and don't forget to clean things up. This one good example I can come up with is reverb. Reverb is sort of like an echo sort of effect, where it's like, imagine if you're in like a concert hall. If you say hello, it's gonna sound like large and sort of like it's bouncing around all over the place. And if you forget to remove the sort of echo effect from that, when you don't actually want your listener to be focusing on it, it's still gonna be there, and it's just gonna be like messing up and getting like in the way of everything else. They call it muddying up the mix, because it's just sort of like it just sort of just makes things really cloudy and hard to make out. So be conscious of those kind of things, and make sure that you listen to individual tracks and make sure that only the things that need to be there are present. He also laid out a couple of steps to take during the mixing process, which is a further method you can take to not confuse yourself. So for example, if you're going to like automate gain, you should probably do that after you put a compressor on, because a compressor could potentially do that for you, and you might end up just wasting your own time. So a lot of stuff like that, get a lot of tips in that regard. So that is Chris Lordalgi's masterclass. Next, I want to talk about Serum. So Serum is a software synthesizer. This is what it looks like. This is a UI. And I mean, there's a bunch of different pages. This is the first page, which I think looks the most impressive personally. And what I learned from working with Serum is to get creative with synth design. Basically, Serum has a lot of strange settings that you wouldn't really think to use as you're creating a synth batch. So messing with those settings and just sort of learning the ins and outs of the synth that you're using can really make for like a lot more of an interesting sound. I also learned that subtlety and movement in each of your synth patches can sort of create a more organic feeling, sort of like the way a guitarist could never pluck one note in the exact same way. If you want your music to sound like it's, a real, like, sort of living, breathing thing, you want to have that effect of something never sounding the exact same twice. So creating sort of like automation within the synth and like changing subtle things can really sort of bring your synth patch to life. And the last thing I focused on here was quality over quantity. It's a lot better to have one really interesting synth that's sort of developing and changing over the course of a song than to have 5 of them playing a saw wave straight through, just playing notes. Like, it's hard to describe exactly what I mean, but it's sort of, you want one thing to focus on that sounds really good, rather than a bunch of different things that sound okay, sort of like pulling the listener's attention all over the place. And the last technical research that I wanted to talk about was the creation of the Doom soundtrack, which was a video I watched from Mick Gordon. The Doom soundtrack is, it's a video game that was made in 2016, and then there's a sequel in, I think, 2020. Jamie, you know this, it was 2020, right?
2020, yeah.
Okay, cool, thank you.
Was this the GDC talk?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, that was the one. That's the one.
So basically, some of the things he talked about were changing the process to change the outcome. So if you're making a new project and you still rely on the old techniques that you were using for your previous work, there's going to be things in your new work that still sound the same. So you have to be sort of willing to let go of your old techniques and just sort of totally change the way you make music on a fundamental level sometimes if you really want to make something different. He also said, in a sort of similar vein, to be comfortable with failure and experimentation. So a lot of times when I was making this project, I would have melodies or entire instruments or even entire songs that I ended up just throwing out because I just couldn't get them to work. Sometimes that happens, and you just make something and you really want it to sort of function within the realm of your project, but it just either doesn't fit or there's just something about it that you can't quite manage to sort of work out. So you have to be, first of all, comfortable with failure and being okay with having to fix things, and you have to be sort of okay with just throwing it out if it doesn't ever manage to work. And the last thing that I learned from Mick Gordon in this regard was something that I call a patcher mess. and it's something that can produce really unique sounds and textures. And I'm going to show you what a patcher mess is right here. So basically, this patcher is a software within FL Studio that you can use. FL Studio, by the way, is the software I use to make music. So patcher here basically allows you to put instruments and effects inside of an instrument or effect. Kind of complicated, but you don't have to think too hard about it. So the general idea of what we have here is, let's see, we have SAR here. This is a synthesizer, and it's going in to fast distortion, which is a distortion plugin, which then goes into animate, which is for saturation. And then this goes into another saturation plugin, but then it also goes into Fab 5, and basically things just sort of like loop around and head into each other, and it creates this really sort of, pretty much any sort of robotic, intentional, like really clean sound that you would get from just using one synth patch with like a line of effects, and sort of get messed up and distorted into creating something that's sort of almost like it has a mind of its own. So it's a little bit harder to control than using just like one synth at a time, but it can also lead to some really, really crazy sounds. And one thing that I know Mick Gordon did, this is why I included this on his slide, is that to make sort of the signature sound of the Doom soundtrack, what he did was he took a sine wave, which is like this, you've probably seen it in math class, and that's pretty much the simplest like sound wave that you can make in a synth. So he took that and you put a little bit of white noise over it, and then you ran it through something that looks a little bit like this. And by doing that, he created what's sort of the signature sound of Doom. When you hear that, you're like, oh, this sounds like the Doom soundtrack. So I just thought that was a really cool example to show up. Continuing with Mick Gordon into the artistic research, another thing he mentioned was sort of the flip side of the patcher mess ordeal, which was write chords, melodies, and each note with intention. It's different from creating a synthesizer because even if you have that mess of sort of like effects, you can usually still discern one note coming out of that mess. But if you have a bunch of notes going on at once and the listener isn't sure what they need to pay attention to, then you end up with something a lot less pleasant to hear. So basically, what he was talking about here is that you want everything in your song that someone can hear to be worth paying attention to. The next thing he went over was shaping your production environment to match the project you're working on. So here's another example of my man Mick Gordon here. When he was making the Doom soundtrack, since it's a very demonic sort of game, demonic themes and you're in hell and all that, he had a human femur bone flute in his studio as he was making this. It was just sitting right up on his shelf. So I think that you can't really get a much better example than that. So I don't have the fortune of coming across a human femur bone flute, but what I do have is some moody lighting, and I can light a candle in my room as I'm working on the soundtrack for this project. So I can sort of get close to what he's talking about here. The next topic is musical archaeology, finding the music. So this really applies to any art form, but it still applies to music as well, which is sort of, I think it's easier to talk about this with visual art, but imagine whenever you want to draw something, you sort of picture it in your head first. You can sort of see what it is that you're trying to draw. It's not a perfectly clear picture, but it's most of it. So basically, Mick Gordon says that your job as an artist is to take that thought in your head and sort of dig it out, as vicious as that sounds from Mr. Boneflute over here, and you want to take that idea, get it out of your head, and turn it into something physical, tangible, that someone else can sort of interact with and consume and understand. And the last thing he said was, don't be afraid to take a fresh approach for every project you do. This is sort of similar to the change the process, change the outcome thing. And by doing this, you will prevent yourself from making the same mistakes or making the same sort of inefficient, problems or the same, or like, basically, you just will create a sort of new process that you can use to create something that sounds a lot different than whatever you've done before. And this will sort of increase your versatility as a musician and prevent you from stagnating in one sort of style. The next thing with artistic research was an interview with Perturbator. Now this guy is an artist in a sort of similar area as Carpenter Brett, sort of like a dark synthwave kind of thing. And a lot of the stuff he talked about was about genre, because the synthwave genre has gotten very oversaturated in between 2010 and 2020. A lot of the music sounds the same, But Perturbator has been one of the artists that has definitely sort of mixed his own style and mixed his roots of synthwave into new, sort of different, like, sounds. So what he said was stick to your DNA, stick to the genre you started in, stick to what makes your music identifiable as yours, but don't be restricted by whatever genre you started in. So, for example, he started with some very, classic like cyberpunk, 80s nostalgia sort of horror movie, slasher kind of stuff. And his most recent album was punk rock with like luscious guitars. It's a very different feeling, but you can still hear that it's him because of some of his signature moves. Like he does a lot of pitch sliding synthesizers. You still hear a lot of that. Next, he said create music that people might not know that they like. So this is, again, pertaining to genre. Don't do something just because it's worked before. Like, there's music, yeah, you can make something that, like, obviously there's going to be an audience for it, but if you want to make something truly great, you should just make something for yourself, and don't worry about who likes it, because there's going to be someone out there who likes it. And the last thing he said was embrace being between genres, pave your own path, and this is really just sort of a summary of everything else that he said in this interview. Next, I wanted to look at some dreaded music theory with my guy Matteo over here. He is a record label owner, and he also is a small-time YouTuber, and I managed to find one of his videos in the algorithm that I found to be really helpful. I have to cough, hang on. Ugh, sorry, allergies. Alright, there we go. So sorry. Alright, so basically he was talking about
Water, take some water.
yeah, alright, sorry. I knew this would happen. Okay, am I good?
Good.
Feeling good. Alright. Continuing. Sometimes less is more. And when it comes to melodies, simpler patterns are a lot easier for the brain to memorize. They're more catchy, which is sort of a word that you sort of just throw around to anything that you would like to listen to twice. But this is sort of a good way of classifying it. It's something that you want to hear over and over again in a song, or at least more than once. So basically, too much variation in a melody can sort of cloud the familiarity of things. So sometimes you really want the exact same pattern to play twice in a row, or even 4 times in a row. And I think this helped me a lot because whenever I make music, I sort of focus a little bit too much on creating little variations in the melody, and I think it started to ruin a little bit of like the potential for being, just catchy and sort of like danceable in some of my music. So what I want to do now is I want you guys to close your eyes again. Well, actually, no, you don't, because it's not recorded. But basically, what I want to do here is I'm going to play like just a couple measures of a song, and I want you guys to guess what song it is because it's very recognizable. Billie Jean, yes. All right, there we go. So that's a great example. That bass line, everyone knows that bass line. I mean, kind of unfair because he's Michael Jackson, but yeah. And the last artistic research that I really focused on was my own reflection and journaling. Is this cheating? Maybe, but I found it to be really helpful and important. So as I was making this music, and really as I've made all of my music over the years, I have always been focused on not losing sight of the art. And like even during my albums, which I was doing more just to sort of improve as an artist, I was still trying to get some sort of message behind them. So not losing sight of the art in this project is particularly important because I want the technical side to be just as good as the artistic side. And I want the sort of message of the album to be just as important as the way it sounds. The next thing was to attack from different angles, don't get stuck. I found that when I make music, it's pretty easy for me to just sort of open a project file and stare at it for like an hour, which is not very productive. So what I started to do was just close it, work on something different, start a different song in the project, maybe even work on a different project entirely, and that'll sort of refresh your brain and sort of get you into a different headspace so you can just sort of like get out of whatever sort of rut you were in. Sort of similar to some of the other things I've said was create music for yourself first. And this is just, I mean, really any artist who's like really like, oh, art is beautiful, he's gonna tell you this. He's gonna say that you want to make music for yourself that expresses your emotions the way you feel, things that sort of take your sort of soul or psyche and put it into something that other people can interact with. And I really value that. I know it sounds pretentious, but sorry. Next, I wanted to say flaws are inevitable and that you need to value the joy in the art over technical perfection. So this was a particular thing that I encountered when I was making that first album, Avarice Divine. I didn't know what I was doing at all, but the reason I finished that album and it's like 45 minutes long is just because I had a ton of fun making it. And I thought that what I was talking about in that album was really important to me and that it was just something that needed to exist. So that's something that I want to keep in mind here. No music will ever be perfect. You will always hear some sort of flaw in whatever you make or whatever someone else makes. There's always something you can point out. So you just, at some point, you have to let go of that. And this mess right here is a bunch of screenshots of, basically I have a little private Discord server, and what I did here was I logged a bunch of different things of thoughts that I had on my own music whenever I was sort of like finished with a session. I'd post it here, and then like 10 minutes later I'd listen back and I'd write whatever I wanted to change in case I had to like leave to go to work or something like that. And this is just a couple of screenshots. There are pages and pages and pages of this. And although it looks really funny, this actually helped me a lot. Alright, so with the research out of the way, I now want to talk about my mentorship. So my mentor was Mike Liska. He has been a musician since the age of 4. He's been playing gigs since the age of 15. He's been a musician by trade since the age of 21, which means like he's making money primarily off of music. And he is a professional drummer, been in multiple bands over these years. He's taught lessons, and right now he's part of a cover band that sort of plays at private events and weddings and such. And also, he's my cousin. That's how I met him. So, that's kind of an important detail. And over the 2-week period, we met 3 times over Zoom. So I'm really lucky to have such a close familial connection to someone who was so perfect for the job. And I included this picture here. This is Young Thug, right? Yeah. I can't tell if it's future or Young Thug, they look really similar, but this is him. And he's sort of standing over this inexperienced guy over here, and he's like, I know what I'm doing, let me take the wheel a little bit. And this is how I felt when Mike was working with me. It felt like I had someone who really knew what they were doing and were sort of showing me the ropes of some of the things that I needed to learn to make this album sort of come to fruition. So I know this is sort of like a meme, but it also really sort of applies to how I felt doing this. I was this dude. So basically, he's a really busy guy. Mike is constantly working. That's one of the things I really learned, is that to really even live in this industry, you have to be constantly working. And even then, he made an effort to really carve out time in his schedule and sort of just listen to what I was working on. He would even look at my project files, really dig into them, and provide feedback on both technical and artistic fronts. And since almost all my music so far, has been created electronically, his background in playing and recording albums with real instruments like actual guitars, actual drums and such, that was really valuable to me. And through the suggestions and advice he made coming from that background, I learned to create sort of a more organic, analog sounding, immersive sort of environment, and I really appreciated that. And additionally, Mike's ability to play guitar way better than I can has become a highlight of the project. I have had guitars in my own music beforehand, especially it was in Avarice Divine. I don't think I even listened to it, but maybe you will after this, who knows. I've had guitars, but I had to mix them in a way that they were either very muffled to sort of cover up my extremely limited skills, or they were too prominent for their own good, if you know what I mean. So Mike's recordings fit with my music a lot better. He knows how to play a lot better. He put them through an amp that really fit with the sort of vibe I was going for. And they just sit right beside, my lisp is coming back, right beside the synthesizers and contributing a really uniquely rich and sort of lively tone that I wouldn't have gotten from just using the software synth. So you'll get to hear that soon when I play the first track of the album titled Moonrise in its entirety. It's coming up. And next I'm talking about telling a story. I mentioned earlier that part of my process in creating an album is to sort of come up with a location that it describes, and I want to expand on that. So returning to my albums, all of these were made to sort of be loose allegories for different things I've encountered throughout my life, primarily on the internet and things that I've seen, really not so good things that I've seen that wouldn't be happening if it wasn't for the internet's existence. So, to put things very simply, let's start with Avarice Divine. This album represented greed, avarice being greed. And the allegory was it's like an underground money factory sort of that processed the people who worked in it. They would be like, all right, this dude's a little tired, so let's throw him in there and turn him into gold. So that's how that worked. It was sort of an allegory for wage slavery. And this next album here is called Crypt City, and this represented flame wars and identity politics that you will probably encountering on Twitter these days. And the allegory here was it's a sort of endless war between two factions of like immortal creatures or demons, and they've been fighting for so long that they don't really even know what started it anymore, and they're really just fighting for the sake of fighting instead of whatever, I don't know, maybe it was like a land dispute or something that they started with, but that's long gone at this point. The next project here, this was Neon Cesspool, and this represented escapism. And I basically created a sort of fiction where there was a sewer system below Crypt City, and it was just full of like drug addicts who would like party until they physically could not continue, and they would like fall over and vomit or something. I don't know. You know, not good. It was like escapism to the point of it hurting you. And then here we have Slate Valley, and this was more about cyberbullying and sort of hatred and judgment that comes with the anonymity of the internet. And my idea here was that there were like people in like full suits of armor and like iron masks. You couldn't see who they really were, and they acted as like, you know, judge, jury, executioner. They would just, whoever they felt, they would enact like violence upon whoever they thought deserved it. And yes, by the way, there was a fifth album, if you recall that. That was a separate thing. That was a soundtrack that I made for a friend. So that's not an allegory, but I still think it was pretty cool. I think Avarice Divine was the best album from an artistic standpoint. It was the most like poignant and sort of unique of these four allegorical projects. The other three were created primarily as a way to improve as a musician, as I said earlier, so they sort of, like the artistic intent sort of took a back seat there. But with A Long Road Through Darkness, I aim to sort of do both things equally as well and take on a topic more broad and more important than any of the topics included in these projects here. So what I'm gonna do is begin the first track now, but it has quite a long ambient section. So I want you guys to sort of like focus on what I'm saying and just allow the song to sort of set the mood a little bit. And the song will eventually, there's like a big drop in the song. When it happens, you'll know. So let me begin. Really hope I don't cough during this. Pretty unfortunate. All right, you don't have to close your eyes to this, by the way. Okay. My parents did that. They didn't do what I said. Okay. Here we go. So growing up has never been an easy thing, right? I mean, there's a reason for like coming of age stories, stuff like, you know, Telemachus. It's been popular in every era. For now, we have stuff like Catcher in the Rye, or we have even Adventure Time and Percy Jackson. I mean, those count. They're coming of age stories, right? You get the picture. It's because it's never been easy to grow up, even in like the long past. Childhood and innocence and like the freedom that they bring to the soul are just really tough to part ways with as you take on more and more responsibilities and get older. So in A Long Road Through Darkness, to walk the road is to grow up. The road itself has existed since the dawn of humanity. The concept of growing up, whether it be learning to hunt and forage or getting your first mind-numbing summer job, it's one of the only things that every single one of us who has ever lived has had to face. Children would inevitably face would provide them with the tools necessary to find success. In the allegory, parents are represented as angels in the sky, scouting ahead with their view from above and preparing the children for what awaits them further down the line. And, you know, that's how it was for hundreds of thousands of years. The challenges of the road would change over time, a little, sure, but never too quickly for the words of the angels to lose their meaning. Like, things worked, and there was really no reason to fear they ever wouldn't. But then they stopped working. Over the last century, the acceleration of human development has sort of grown beyond our control. There are new inventions with unprecedented influence on the general psyche becoming widespread before we even realize a fraction of their potential for damage. And every prediction that we can make says this is just the beginning of something exponential. So my generation, Gen Z as it's been named, we in many ways are like a group of lab rats. We're the first generation to grow up with no memories of a world devoid of modern technology. We're the first generation to have its brain development inextricably molded by this technology. And we're the first to face the resulting consequences, both psychological and sociological, that have never before been encountered in the human race. And now we're struggling to sort of heal our rotting attention spans and fragmented identities and overwhelmed by things that have been considered just menial tasks by those who were born 50 years or so before us, all while the amount of work needed to sustain oneself in adulthood continues to increase without mercy. Silicon Valley has sort of opened doors to regions untold that can never again really be shut, inviting inhuman horrors to rule people who are just woefully unprepared for their world. And as the sun has started to set, our youth has begun to fade, and a terrible storm is starting to break. And now there are clouds rolling in, sort of obscuring the view of the angels, violent thunder drowning out the choir. The paths they paved have been buried in our alien world of chrome and code. And as the chimera of the future rears its ugly head, red eyes shimmering, piercing our souls, the moon rises. In case that was a little too cryptic, I can totally understand that. The album is essentially about the things that my generation is struggling with as we're entering adulthood, and how we're pretty much on our own with solving these problems since the world our parents grew up in was entirely different from ours. I don't really think I want to get too deep into the allegory, more deeper than that, because one thing I wanted to be sure of was that each listener can sort of interpret and sort of apply the fiction in their own way and adapt it to their own experiences. And delving too far into what it all means for me might ruin that for you. So Generally, everything is meant to give a feeling of, nearly insurmountable adversity, a fight to survive in a hostile world that kind of wants you dead, and just enough of a glimmer of hope to keep you going. So this album isn't acting as an answer to our problems, but instead as a way to spread awareness of their existence. We're all going through it right now, and since the pandemic, I feel like a lot more people have sort of become aware of exactly what it is, when I say we're going through it. But not everyone. There are still some people who are too busy just fighting the battle, and they're sort of just overwhelmed to the point where they don't really have the time to sort of ponder what's causing it. And there are also some people who are choosing ignorance and escapism because they know that accepting the truth would make life just a little too grim to sort of bear and continue. But I want us all to take reality head on. And to solve a problem, we must first sort of collectively recognize its existence. And we have to unite our minds against this. Develop ways of living alongside modern technology and in relative harmony and health. I don't think things can ever be as they were before. Not that they were perfect then, but they'll never be perfect now either. So, and basically I want people to be able to there are definitely advantages to modern technology, so we need to take advantage of what's there, but also heed its dangers and sort of point it out for other people in our generation, especially for people who are going to be coming after us, because I don't want to know what a 4-year-old raised on TikTok is going to look like. It's kind of terrifying. The reason I'm so passionate about this particular topic is because over the last 4 years, especially, throughout my whole life really, but over the last 4 years it's been particularly impactful. I've fallen victim to the grip of technology-induced depression and addiction, definitely more than once, including during the creation of this project, actually. So with that, I want to get into sort of the major reflective part of this slideshow. I'm really, really happy with how the songs in A Long Road Through Darkness sound right now. Don't get me wrong, I think they're great. And I think the story that tells is really great as well. I feel like I generally learned and improved upon my craft throughout this year, and I produced something that I'm really proud to call a sort of culmination of everything I know about making music so far. But the reality is right now, there isn't as much to hear as I would have liked. This is going to be a 10-track album when it's done, but as of right now, I only have about a third of it completed. I think I really let some people down here, including myself. And to put it simply, I could have done better. Probably should have done better. As I mentioned earlier, Mike was as proactive of a mentor as he possibly could have been between his packed schedule and busy lifestyle. I, on the other hand, kind of dropped the ball in this regard with the mentorship. I regret not reciprocating his level of professionalism. I was late to return texts, and my sleep schedule got so bad during the 2-week period that I actually slept through one of our scheduled meetings entirely, which was, a little unprofessional, to be honest. And because of the nature of my product, I had been spending a lot of time in my room on my computer, just sort of working on the music, and I hadn't made a schedule for myself, despite sort of knowing in the back of my mind that without one, I really struggled to be productive. So, that's one thing I obviously could have done better. I definitely missed out on some of the knowledge and wisdom I could have received from Mike and other people who I've reached out to over time. I'm 18 years old, right? I'm an adult now. I could have done better. And my plan is to have a career in music. Ideally, I'd be an audio engineer, maybe working in a studio of some kind and doing freelance soundtrack work for video games and movies, personal projects on the side. And although I've known since the beginning that that's a really rough path to take, it's not the kind of industry that's easy to live in and make a living off of, there's one thing Mike told me that had a particularly important impact that I really have remembered since he said it. And that's that there's 2 things in the industry that are more important than any other. One of them is getting the work done, and the second one is showing up to deliver the work when people need it. No matter how good you are, nobody will want to work with you if they don't trust that you can get them what they need when they need it. So many times I have failed to do those 2 things, but as I'm mature as a person, I've sort of learned to look for the bright side or the silver lining, whatever you want to call it, and learn from my mistakes to avoid making them a second time. And through this mentorship, and really through senior seminar, and honestly through high school in general, I've sort of been really lucky to experience the feeling of failure and getting to know how it feels to sort of drop the ball. And to learn from those mistakes before I have a reputation that they would obviously damage if I were out in the field actually, being like an audio engineer or something like that. I've learned what I'm up against in these past 4 years a lot better than I did like before high school started, and I've developed a lot more of the tools that I'm going to need to deal with those with whatever I'm up against. So next time I will do better. I forgot those things up there. That's my bad. So with that was my final slide, and I want to thank you guys once again for attending my exhibition. It really means a lot to me that so many people showed up. It's like I know I'm seeming really confident and all cocky and sort of, but I'm nervous. So I really appreciate that you guys are interested in the topic, because I know that that this style of music and the sort of weird fictional allegory stuff is not familiar to a lot of you. It's pretty foreign. So I genuinely appreciate you listening to it and consuming what I have to say and doing the whole closing your eyes thing. That was really nice to see. So up on the board right now are some URLs you can scan. You can see my senior seminar website. You can see my SoundCloud page, my Bandcamp page, both places where I post my music. And this here is my Bandcamp collection. This is where I buy music on my fan account. So if you're interested in hearing some of the stuff that I like to listen to, you can look at this one. And since this is D block and it's like 2:21, I have a little bit of time before I have to leave, so I might play some more of the music if enough people are willing to stick around to hear it. So if you're interested in that, then stick around. But other than that, I'm pretty much done for now. Thank you.
Congratulations, Jack.
Thank you.
I would like to open it up to the panel quickly first. If you guys have any questions that you'd like to hear some answers to before we head out to consolidate our feedback, and then we'll open it up to the rest of the room.
So, first of all, this was extremely well done. So congratulations. Moonrise is killer.
Thank you.
Like the composition of it, the mix, it's so clean and well done and well presented. And the way that you presented it with the text at the beginning, like, made the drop that much more powerful for me. And on that thought, I was curious how you balance like telling a story that means something to you with leaving room for your audience to interpret it in a way that's personal to them.
Right. So I think this is luckily a subject that pretty much every person on the planet can relate to right now. Like anyone who lives in a country where you can go and buy a phone really easily is dealing with this. So that sort of made this project a little bit easier to do, and it's a little bit easier to relate to some of the other stuff I've done. Like I don't think many people are thinking about capitalism all the time, like with Everest Divine. But people are definitely thinking of this. And part of what I wanted to do here was sort of create something that someone could listen to and sort of like hear about like the lore of it and sort of think like, oh, this thing represents that time that X happened, or like, like the moon for me was the time that I like encountered this thing, and then I felt like I was really growing up and I really recognized it, or something like that. So I feel like I created sort of general things that people can sort of identify, and then apply it to the very specific events that happened to them.
You shared a lot with us today,
Yeah.
actually.
Sorry, it might have been a little long.
No,
Great.
it's really impressive to see a nice balance, the balance you've created between something very personal and very professional. And I'm just asking sort of, you actually pulled out a few meta lessons, things where ideas were linking together from some of your foundational research and your own experience. And I'm wondering, at the end, you kind of touched on this idea of you're in the process of converting what's art into work. And could you just speak for a moment about what that felt like in this year?
So, I think I'm lucky in some regards because I actually really enjoy the process of like the work and like, the more technical side of things, like what some people might consider boring, like equalization and compression and you know, like mixing stuff to make sure that it just sounds good, so it won't blow people's eardrums out. I enjoy that part a lot. I have a lot of fun doing that, which is why I want to be an audio engineer. I'm not saying I primarily want to be making soundtracks. It's also easier to have a job that way. So this year, I think it wasn't as hard as it has been in the past, because especially now that I'm a lot more experienced with the technical side, so it doesn't take as much time, it doesn't take as much effort to get things sounding the way I want them to sound, or like professional. So, you know, again, back to Hours Divine, that one, putting in like the technical effort was really kind of a slog on that one. Like, it was just like a pain to get everything to sound at least audible. So this time around, it actually wasn't too bad.
Alright, I'm going to steal the panel away at this point, and I would love it if you guys would stay, give Jack some congratulations, maybe listen to some music, and celebrate this accomplishment. Congratulations again, Jack.